So I'm obviously going to continue to speak with you about the Supreme Court today, but before I do so, I think at least a few comments are in order about the grotesque political assassination that occurred last week, right? And so Charlie Kirk was shot while giving a speech at a university in Utah, and is right now the shooter has been apprehended and is in custody. And I don't need to rehash the graphic details of that event, or really offer any judgment on Charlie Kirk. He is someone whose stated opinions on a variety of issues I have very little sympathy for, but that does not matter in this context. What matters is that once again, our politics has been replaced by violence. And I want to be as clear as possible. I agree with Hannah Arendt that using violence is an alternative to politics, not a form of politics, and that this is increasingly common throughout the United States today. I'm going to speak with you today about what I see as the growing tension between the lower courts and the Supreme Court, among other things. And I will point out to you that there have been assassination attempts on judges in our society. And when I say attempts, the judge in question, the one I'm thinking of, was not home, but her husband and son were home, and both of them were shot. Her son was killed. And now it's happened, I believe, on 10 separate occasions that federal judges have received pizzas ordered to their homes or their chambers that are ordered in the name of the young man, the boy who was assassinated. And right, we have to be as clear as possible. That's a clear threat on the judiciary from citizens who are saying, if you don't start ruling in the way I want you to, well, you may be next. And that this is just one of a rising wave of assassinations, attempted assassinations, use of violence in order to displace politics, in order to attempt to mow down the people with whom we disagree. Not only does it have no place in a democratic society, we've talked about Antonio Gramsci's favorite metaphor for how democracy resolves its disputes: casting paper stones, right? Voting, not fighting. And I think that the deeper definition of the kind of civility that underlines a successful democracy is that we deliberate. We recognize that there is something to be learned from the other side, that even if I find some of what Charlie Kirk says to be deeply offensive, I need to understand why he's saying it. And then ultimately to try to, on the one hand, convince him that the stuff that he's saying that I find to be repugnant is confused or mistaken, but also that I take him seriously as a person, as a fellow citizen, and that therefore I need to try to figure out why he's saying that. That part of the reason, part of the way, I should say, I respect him is by engaging with him, deliberating with him, arguing with him, and perhaps in so doing, I learn something. There's a reason why he's saying what he's saying. I may find it to be deeply offensive. I may continue to think it's profoundly wrong, but there's an opportunity to learn perhaps what the deeper motivations are. And maybe some of them I will conclude are actually issues that I've failed to take seriously and that I need to address. And so that's the way civility and respect manifest themselves and enable democratic politics. And then we add to that the value of the rule of law, The rule of law says no matter how problematic I think someone is, no matter how criminal I think their conduct is, I do not take the law into my own hands. I certainly don't attempt to silence the people with whom I disagree with a bullet or a hammer, right? And so the foundational principles here, I think, are crystal clear. But what is, I think, perhaps important to notice, it's not just, I won't pile on the criticism of Donald Trump for failing to strike the right tone in the aftermath of political violence, which should be a tone that brings people together, that is conciliatory and healing, and that suggests that violence, no matter who does it, needs to be condemned, but not treated as something that justifies further violence. We need to return to the principles I've just articulated, to deliberation and the rule of law, to political and democratic responses to our differences, as opposed to seeking vengeance. And what I will say is that in basic respects, we can't expect that of Donald Trump. It's not just dispositional, right? It's not just who he is. It is also that he is a man of our times and for our times. And our times are times in which we are so divided, so partitioned as a society, that it makes it very hard to listen to trust, certainly to work with the other side of the partisan divide. And that the reason that it's so hard is in part political. Our parties have decided, have concluded, have perhaps responded to the evidence that negative partisanship is the form of partisanship that best succeeds. And what that means is treating the other side as the enemy, as someone to be feared. I just got a message that my internet connection is unstable. I'm going to try to, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but try to do something about that for a moment. Are you hearing me well enough so far? I hope.
We're
Yeah.
hearing you.
Okay.
Yes.
I will just get out of a couple of the other programs that may be interfering with my bandwidth, because when I get that message, usually it's not long until we begin to have trouble. So let's see. I believe that should do the trick. Um, and let's hope there's no more issues. So let me get back into. I guess I don't really need to be in my slides for this. The other thing that I want to say, why Donald Trump is a man for our time, why our political parties are engaged in negative partisanship, why in particular we seem to be in a moment of existential politics, a moment where, right, we don't just say the reason to vote for me, Donald Trump, is because the other side, Kamala Harris, is going to be so awful that you will regret having supported her, right? And so that the main reason to vote for the Democrats, the main reason to vote for the Republicans, is the awfulness of the rivals. It's not just that. It's that our negative partisanship has taken the form of existential politics. The other side is a threat to our country, to our Constitution, to our rule of law, to our way of life, to our culture, to our values, to our identities, right? And that, I hope, rings clear and true, because there is so much of it. And I will admit that I engage in this kind of rhetoric. And it's not just rhetoric, it is that I do, in fact, believe that Donald Trump is increasingly a threat to democracy, that he is increasingly corrupting our government, that he is increasingly instrumentalizing what should be agencies entrusted to the rule of law to do his political dirty work, to take down his enemies, and that in so doing, he's abusing his power and threatening our democracy. So there I go, right? Engaging in the kind of rhetoric that may make political violence more likely. And by the way, let me note the obvious that Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans do the same thing. They suggest that if we don't get serious about immigration and about the way in which Christian values are under attack right now, if we don't start cutting ourselves off from international trade, etc., quote, we won't have a country anymore. And what they mean, I think, the reason it resonates with their followers, what we can learn from Charlie Kirk by listening to him, is that a large number of Americans legitimately, or at least for good reason, feel that as this country has become more diverse, as women have gained greater rights, as our society and culture have become less traditional and less uniformly Christian or Protestant, they have suffered. They have suffered downward economic mobility. They've suffered a feeling of lack of recognition and respect, of growing marginality in our society, that they are shut out of both economic prosperity and full and equal inclusion in our society. And the fact that they are, to my mind, misled into believing that it is the right fact that we've allowed too much immigration or too much diversity or too much globalization is to blame for all of this doesn't change the fact that they have a legitimate fear about this society and the direction that it's moving.
David, you keep breaking up.
I am breaking up now. Okay. Give me one moment. Let me see what I can do. Um, this may interrupt our broadcast, in which case, our class, I guess I should say, I'll have to get back to you. I'm going to try to reconnect to the internet and see if I get a more reliable signal. Give me one moment. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I have reconnected to the internet and it looks to be quite robust, the signal. So hopefully that solves our problem. Um, and so I was saying, right, that our interests appear to conflict in profound ways in 2025. And they are right. I don't want to say objectively conflicting, right? The interest is one thing, the way in which we interpret it is another. I want to suggest that for many of us, the interpretation we have of our interest is not wholly accurate. But having said that, we need to engage each other, to convince each other that, right, we are not as divided, right? That our diversity may in fact be a strength, that we have more in common than that which separates us, and that we can ultimately resolve our problems and our disagreements in ways that are peaceful to begin with, and hopefully, let us hope, ultimately mutually beneficial. I deeply believe that we're not so far gone that civil war or succession is the only limit. But this then brings us back to, or the only solution, I should say, right? The text we started with in this right class last week, which is the text from Erwin Chemerinsky, saying our Constitution is so flawed. It's an 18th century document that we have tried to convert into a 21st century document, but it no longer constructively channels our politics. And we're seeing increasing signs that the effort to continue to use the unreconstructed or the only partially reformed Constitution of 1789 no longer works for America of 2025, and that unless or until we begin more fundamental political and constitutional reform, we may see increasing signs that people are giving up on political solutions to our problems, and that leads people into violence. And so my message to you is clear. Violence is never justified in a society, even with the damaged political process the United States has. But we should certainly treat it as symptomatic of the kind of desperation, the kind of alienation that is becoming more and more widespread. And so, in that regard, I'm sorry to say we should not be surprised if violence continues, if violence grows more common. It is the alarm bell telling us that we need to fix our politics in order to restore confidence in civility, in deliberation, in voting, in representative, and maybe even greater participatory democracy as a way to solve our problems, or else we're going to keep losing core people. We're going to keep losing enough people that violence continues to be a appealing alternative to politics in the 21st century. I'll stop there on this theme. I am happy to hear if you have comments or thoughts about this. I'm also more than happy to move away from this topic and to start thinking about constitutional law and the Supreme Court with you again, which I promised, I'm not sure I'm going to keep my promise, would be a way of pulling back somewhat from the depressing
Still breaking up.
politics. Mary, go ahead. Oh, were you trying to weigh in, Mary?
No, I just was informing you we're still breaking up a bit.
Oh boy. Okay. I am sorry. I'm not quite sure what I can do about this. Maybe there's a problem with the internet where I am right now. I'm looking to see. There's really nothing else that I have open on my computer that should be interfering with Zoom getting all of the bandwidth of my internet connection. And on my end, my internet connection looks to be robust. So I apologize, but I don't know what I can do to fix it. Is it too bad for me to continue, or should I at least try to get through? And you can let me know if it gets worse. Okay, thank you, Mary. Anybody else before we jump into the main topic for today? Let me get the slides back up.
David,
Yes, I'm listening.
this is Wilma.
Hi, Wilma.
The problem is that as I see it, there's a lack of trust. And how can we get together to try to come up with a beautiful document that will work for us in this time and age when we don't trust each other?
Yeah, and I completely agree with that comment. And so if you remember the passage, I don't have it directly at the top of my slides from Erwin Chemerinsky. He says this is going to be hard. Don't be confused. This is going to be difficult work, but it's essential work, and we've got to rise to the challenge. And you know that those are good words, good ideas. I like the faith in the American people that it expresses, but we have to remember how exceptionally lucky we were that in 1787, the people who assembled in Philadelphia in 1791, right, James Madison writing our Bill of Rights, the idea that lurking in the background was Thomas Jefferson, who had drafted the Virginia Constitution. These were all deeply flawed documents, and yet they were, I think, rightly regarded by history as also world transformative documents, because for the first time in modern history, we really had a constitution that expressed the idea of popular sovereignty, even at the same time that it accommodated slavery and excluded women and the unpropertied. We were on a path as a result of this document that gradually created a more perfect union in the United States. And I do worry who's in the Constitutional Convention if it happens in the summer of 2029, right? And are we able to compromise? Are we able to recruit the minds that have given serious thought to this issue? I'm going to say one more thing to you, Wilma. Right? Chemerinsky in that introduction to No Democracy Lasts Forever suggests that succession is another possible alternative, and I want to suggest that there have been periods of sustained constitutional innovation in the United States since the 1780s and 90s, right? In the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, in the first decades of the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century. And that these periods very often start, on the one hand, at the state level, and on the other hand, in civil society, right? And so there's a wonderful old law review article by a man named Randall Kennedy, who teaches at Harvard Law School, talking about Martin Luther King's Constitution. And he points out, look, King did not have a law degree. King was not a constitutional lawyer. And yet, Martin Luther King Jr., through his activism in public society, contributed to the transformation of the Constitution in a way that ultimately informed the Supreme Court. And so maybe the model for constitutional reform here shouldn't be, right, get all the great constitutional minds of our generation together in Philadelphia and lock them in a room for a few months until they hammer out a new document. Maybe it should be, let's start the experiment in, right, California. Let's start the experiment through our activism and our organizing, and hope that we find the Martin Luther King Jr. of 2025, who articulates an alternative understanding of the Constitution, and in so doing inspires us to revisit, revise, or at least change the meaning of our founding document. But having said that, even that is going to be a heavy lift, right? Martin Luther King Jr., yes, he flew in the face of sustained racial prejudice and violence and showed tremendous courage in doing so, but he also operated in an America with three TV stations, three channels, right? And so, what Walter Cronkite, etc., said about Martin Luther King Jr. became the way in which most of us understood what he was doing. Today, right, what Fox News will say about the 21st century Martin Luther
David, you
King
keep freezing.
Jr. I'm so sorry. Are you hearing me okay, or is the voice also going in and out? Can you hear me at all right now? Okay. I'm back now. I guess you saw me go away for a minute.
Yes.
Yes.
And I know I was in the middle of something. I didn't actually voluntarily leave the meeting. My computer kicked me out. Am I stable at this point? I'm not talking about my mentality, just my internet connection.
At the moment.
Good, good. So you got to hear my joke even. So, um,
No. Oh,
uh,
yeah.
pardon?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, okay, good. I even heard a little giggle, I think, in the background. I know it wasn't terribly funny. Um,
And you're gone.
You're gone again.
okay, I'm gonna leave and come back. Sit tight. Let me see if I can actually make this work. So sorry.